Okay, so this is lesson 12, configuring a network policy server. And this is dealing with network policy server infrastructure. This comes from exam objective 4.1, again, configure network policy server, otherwise known as NPS. So let's take a look at some radius terms and how that applies. So radius stands for remote authentication dial-in user service. This is a protocol, a TCP/IP protocol that is configured to work over UDP. It is a networking and client-server protocol. Provides centralized authentication for authorization and accounting, so that AAA for connecting to and using a network service. So we're centralizing authentication, authorization, and accounting. And this can be used in wireless remote access connections like a VPN or 802.1x switches or even remote desktop services gateway. And the Network Policy Server, or NPS, is Microsoft's Radius server. So let's talk about the authorization for a moment. That is the process that determines what a user is permitted to do on a computer system or network. Again, it's the process that determines what a user is permitted or allowed to do on any given system or network. So we're giving, it's giving authority. Now, the Radius client, that is a network access server. In this case, it could be a VPN or a dial-in server, or it's a network access device, such as a wireless access point. It is going to forward a Radius request to a Radius server. So it's this intermediate layer. Any one of these devices will be forwarding requests to the Radius server. Where are these requests coming from? They come from the access clients. So these are computers or devices that contact or connect to a Radius client. And they require authentication and authorization to connect to the network or server. So again, it's these end devices. It could be a home computer, it could be a laptop, it could be a PDA, it could be a smartphone, but they're needing access to internal resources, such as a server. And so they're going to need to go through these access or Radius clients or access servers, and those will be contacting the Radius server. So here we can see the infrastructure as a whole. We have at our top layer here the access clients. Each of those are attempting to access a network resource, and they're going to go through a dial-in server or a VPN server or a wireless access point or even a switch. These are access servers or devices, but from the standpoint of Radius, they are the Radius clients. They are clients of a Radius server. Here is our Radius server. And in Microsoft's case, it's going to be an NPS server. That is the Radius server. Again, this is providing authentication and access. Now, these are going to be communicating typically with something like an Active Directory domain controller or SQL Server for the Radius accounting. We'll look more at that later. So when your NPS, your network policy server, is used as a Radius server for authentication, authorization, and accounting, it's going to follow these steps. So step one, the access client will access a VPN server or some wireless access point. So here we have an access client like a laptop, maybe somebody's home computer, or maybe they're on the road, and they need to get to some resource on the network like a server that we can't see on here. But they need to go through a VPN server. Now the VPN server, when it gets that request, what is it going to do? Now the VPN server as a Radius client is going to create a connection request and send it to the Radius server. The Radius server is the NPS server. So there we have an access request message sent from the VPN server, which is a Radius client, to the NPS server, which is a Radius server. Now the NPS server is going to evaluate the access request message. So it'll examine that access request message. And it's looking at certain aspects of it, the policies that are already enabled on the server and comparing them against the access request. Now, if required, that NPS server is going to send an access challenge message to the access server. So this challenge goes back to the access server. The access server is going to process the challenge and send an updated access request to the NPS server. Now at this stage, we've met the challenge. We've got an updated access request. What does the MPS server do next? Well, it's going to check the user credentials, and it's going to check the dial-in properties of the user account. And these are going to be obtained by using a secure connection to a domain controller. So here you can see a secure connection is made between the Radius server and the domain controller. The domain controller is going to check that information against its Active Directory database. And if all is good, it's going to send back user information and dial-in properties for that user account. Now, when the connection attempt is authorized, we just got an authorization from the Active Directory domain controller, and it's authorized with the dial-in properties of the user account and the network policies that are stored on our NPS server, which we'll look at later. The NPS server is going to send an access accept message to the access server. Off that goes. The access server, when it receives that, if the connection, oh, by the way, what happens if it receives it, but what happens if the connection attempt is not authenticated or not authorized? So we looked at what happens if it is authorized. It's going to send a message across, the MPS server does, but what if it fails? It's, the user's either not authorized or not authenticated. Maybe they're not in the database. Maybe they're in the database, but they're not authorized to have access through a VPN. Maybe it wasn't set up yet. So what happens next? Well, you can see that an access reject message will be sent by the NPS server back to the VPN client, and then that information will ripple down to our clients out here. Now, if, however, they are authenticated and authorized, then the access server is going to complete the connection process with the access client, and it's going to send an accounting request message. So the access server makes the connection with the with the access client. So now we have a VPN tunnel here, and then it's going to send an accounting request message to the NPS server, and that's where the message will get logged. Now, the NPS server sends an accounting response back to the access server. We have an active connection. We have accounting going, because oftentimes we're going to want to be able to capture the information about who's accessed, how long they've accessed, and we can use this for chargeback or just keeping track of things. Now, in that case, the accounting request and response came directly from the NPS server, but we'll look at briefly later on how you can use a SQL Server for your Radius accounting. Now, we can have multiple server infrastructures. So we could have simply a single Radius server, but it's generally a good idea to have at least more than one Radius server, so that way if your one server goes down, you're not completely lost in the woods. So looking at multiple Radius server configurations, there's a couple of them. So let's take a look at this first scenario. So here we have a primary Radius server with alternate Radius servers, and you can see that we've got a VPN server sends that connection request onto the primary Radius server over here. We have some alternate servers waiting in the wings, but they're not being used currently. Now, if that primary, however, becomes unavailable, then requests can be sent to the alternates by the VPN server. So in this case, we're not using a proxy. We've programmed the VPN server to send requests to multiple Radius servers as needed. So if the first one becomes unavailable, we can send a request out to our other Radius servers. By the way, these are providing authentication. So once the request is made, we do not need to continue to contact them. Now, another multiple radius server configuration. We can have a radius proxy that's located between the radius server and the radius clients. So here's an MPS server. It's acting as a radius proxy. Here's our radius servers, the MPS servers down here. And then we have access clients like a dial-in server, VPN, etc. So we can make connections from each of these devices, and taking each of our MPS servers can take turns responding to these connection requests. We can provide a load balancing option. So that's when you can prioritize. So we can set an order of importance of a radius server to the proxy server. Now the highest priority is 1. So if we set them all at 1, we can balance the load, and each one of these MPS servers will receive a request in turn. Where is this set up? This is going to be set up on your proxy. This is the device that's going to determine which of your NPS servers or radius servers will actually receive the requests. Now, let's talk about adding a remote radius server group. And what is that? Now, you configure NPS as a radius proxy. You create a new connection request policy. So in the NPS server, we select new remote radius server group, and we can name the group, and then we can add radius servers into the list here by hitting the add button. Now, this policy will determine which connection requests will be forwarded to other radius servers. So we can set up a policy that sends some connection requests to other servers, while this server here, which is sending them off, could actually handle some of the other connection requests. It wouldn't have to send it off. In that case, it wouldn't be acting as a proxy for those requests. The remote radius server group, this is the MPS can send these connection requests to these radius servers. So these radius servers, these are the remote radius server group. Now, configuring radius clients. Standard configuration will include radius server for dial-up or VPN connections, radius server for 802.1x wireless or wired connections, and a NAP policy server, which will be discussed in lesson 14. So selecting a dial-up or VPN connections type. Now we're looking at the MPS Advanced Configuration. You can see in the Advanced Configuration you have several nodes for configuring the radius server, for configuring accounting and clients, for configuring your NAP health policy server, and configuring a radius proxy. Here we can see the network policies on the left-hand side, and you can see the network policies node in the policies section. And here's our various policies. So we have a secure wireless connections policy. It's been enabled. And a VPN connections policy. That's also enabled. Look at the priority order, the processing order. We got order 1 and 2. These are granting access. These two here are denying access, hence the red X's. Now, radius templates are kind of a cool thing, because these are specifically designed to help cut down the amount of time that it's going to take you to configure a radius server. If you have multiple radius servers and you want them to have the same setup, because perhaps you're using a proxy and so you want multiple radius servers with the same policies on them, then setting up a template and employing that template on each of your radius servers is going to save you a lot of time. The template does not affect the functioning of your NPS. A template is simply a description of a policy. It's not a policy itself. So you can apply that template when you're creating policies. Now, radius accounting. You have somebody logging into your network, so we want to account for that. So the MPS can log that accounting data to either a text log file locally or a SQL Server database. We saw that earlier in the diagram. So here we have the MPS server generating an accounting start message. The radius accounting server sends an acknowledgement, and then the radius client can generate an accounting stop message when it's done.